Hello, 1, 2.
Something up about the minutes. I'll let you know.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Could everybody get their seats?
Intervention. 3, 4, 5,
Afternoon, Ken.
6, 7, 8.
7, 8, 9.
We haven't had meetings in formats in September.
All right.
Timekeeper, I had all the.
All right, ladies and gentlemen,
Rick, do you have my space needs study?
Go.
all right, we ready to get going?
Bring it.
Call it to order, please. Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Allen,
Alan, by remote if allowed. Good
Bates,
afternoon.
Berman,
Here.
Doherty, Davis, Ford, Gums,
Here.
Iqbal,
Juby here.
Kenyon, Caius,
Guys present.
Leonard,
Leonard present via Zoom.
Lewis, Linder,
Linda present remote.
Molina,
Molina present.
Roth,
Roth here.
Sanchez, Silva,
Silva's here.
Strathman,
Strathman present.
Surges, Carver, Pepe, Williams,
Williams here.
Young,
Young here, remote.
Pirog.
I'm here.
You do not have an in-person quorum.
Okay, so we do not have an in-person quorum. I'd like to be able to invite, with your permission, Deb Allen, Myrna, Mr. Linder, Mr. Doherty.
Can't do that because we don't have a quorum.
All right, so we invite all board members to listen and to participate. There will be no voting on any issue today because we do not have a quorum.
And because it's a,
I'm sorry?
and because it's a committee of the whole.
No, we have minutes.
Oh,
We have minutes.
Would-
So with that, since you have on the festive red shirt, Spades,
okay.
pledge, please.
To the flag of the United States of America. To the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We will not be able to approve any of our minutes today because we do not have a quorum.
Yeah.
If we do have a quorum, then we will address that as we go through.
Madam Chair, we're having trouble hearing you.
Oh, here, I said, that's much better. All right, thank you.
Hey, over there?
You really want to pass those minutes? All right, we're on to public comment. Mr. Young, I believe you are wanting to speak and you can put your image up.
Okay, can you hear me?
Very good. Looks like you're in the car.
Yes, but I'm stopped. I'm not moving.
You're safe.
Yes, good. Safe driving is important. Okay, very nice. Okay, ready to go. And is this on or off agenda, sir?
It is off agenda.
So whenever you're ready.
Okay. The power of the chair. The county board agenda is controlled by the chairman, a very powerful position. A proclamation passed the Public Service Committee meeting last month. Since this passed out of committee, this should have been put on the full county board meeting in April, but due to politics, this was not put on the agenda. I wonder what part of that proclamation is offensive. Who told the chair Pirog not to put this on the agenda? Why would they go against the will of the people? Was it this statement? It is unlawful under federal law as well as Illinois state law for non-citizens to participate as voters in federal elections, midterm elections, consolidated elections, primary elections, special elections, school board elections, and any other elections conducted within the jurisdiction of Kane County. Why would this trigger such a reaction? This is simply stating that by law, non-citizens do not have the right to vote. And these laws date back to the founding of the United States. Or was it this statement? Illinois State Salina Villanueva, representing District 12, has proposed legislation, Senate Bill 1345, which was filed in the Illinois State Senate and would permit non-citizens of the United States to register and vote in school board elections, a move that diverges from the long-standing requirement of the U.S. citizenship for voter eligibility. Yes, you heard that right. This state senator wants to grant illegals the right to vote in school board elections. I have contacted her several times. I have not heard back. Which of these two statements would lead to censorship that would lead to not having this proclamation put on the April County Board agenda? So why blame Chair Pirog? Well, let's look at Kane County Statute, Section 247, Section C1. It says, the chairman, with the advice of the executive committee, shall prepare an agenda for each meeting of the county board prior to such meeting. Okay, that means the agenda is set during the executive committee meeting. Well, who sets the executive committee agenda? It is the chairman of the board along with the vice chairman of the board. The April executive committee failed to put the proclamation that passed the Public Service Committee on their agenda, which means that it would not be on the full county board agenda. So the decisions of 1 or 2 people out of 25 can change the topics and agenda for Kane County. very powerful positions. If a resolution or proclamation passed through the committee structure is not to their liking or political agenda, they can simply ignore it. And that is their prerogative. It is within their purview. They are following the rules. I ask that this proclamation be placed on the full county board agenda in June. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Kathy Flesberg.
Hello. I'm Kathy Fussberg. I want to talk about a couple of things. And the first
Kathy,
thing,
I'm sorry, I hate to interrupt you. This is not part of your time. Are you on or off agenda, ma'am?
I think it's actually, it's about the minutes and how, and it's also about the agenda packets. So it's sort of agenda. I think it's
Sort
not
of-
good. I think
sort
it's
of
a
agenda.
3-minute thing. I was planning on being off agenda, but then I questioned it. So
Okay.
I
let's
think
give you-
it'll be
let's
under
give you
3
three.
minutes.
Okay.
First, let me start out by saying that the more and more lately, when you click on an agenda packet for certain meetings, such as the meeting that was just at 2 p.m. for the Forest Preserve and Finance, what you get is the wrong agenda. They had attached last month's agenda. And this is happening quite a bit. Last month, I looked at 3 different committees, and what was attached was the same agenda from a previous meeting the previous month from one of the committees. This is happening so much that I find it hard to believe that it's a mistake. It seems like it's very intentional. And all the information for an open meeting is supposed to be attached 48 hours prior to that meeting, and it's not. I looked back at the agenda for the county meeting that was on February 27th, and half of it's redacted. I was at that meeting. I don't understand why anything would be redacted. It was an open meeting. So that I question, because somebody should be able to look back and see what was on the agenda for a certain meeting. So maybe you could look at that. The agenda and packets are scanned, I would imagine, to send to the board members before the meeting. So really, there should be no excuse as to why it's attached wrong on the website for the public to see. And I think that this needs to be somebody needs to double check this because it's happening a lot. Wrong agenda packets. And the public body may not vote on any matter that was not provided to the public 48 hours prior to the said meeting, according to 5 ILCS 120/202A of the Illinois Assembly. So that would mean anything voted on at the 2 p.m. meeting is null and void because you didn't attach the right agenda. So the public didn't have a chance to know what was being voted on. I mean, I don't think it was a big deal, but I'm just saying this needs to end. We need to start seeing the proper agenda and the proper agenda packets at least 48 hours prior. Then the last thing I want to talk about is the minutes. Do you know this is the 7th month in a row that you haven't had a quorum or a meeting? The committee of the whole met in September. The next 3 months were canceled. And now the first 4 months of this year, you have not had a quorum. That's a problem. I believe by law, you're supposed to meet every 6 months at least. So I don't know if this committee needs to be dissolved and you need to put the agenda on another, like the county board. I don't know what the difference is between the county board and the county of the whole, committee of the whole, but you get my drift. And that's basically what I wanted.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Chris?
Welcome, Dr. Silva. All right, I'm going to be turning this over right now for the rest of the time that we have together. We're going to be talking about the final draft of the facilities master plan. Mr. Dwyer, Jason, or Roger, Mr. Fonstock, would you like to introduce the topic at hand?
All right. Good evening. Roger Fonstock with the IT and Building Management Department. So tonight we kind of set aside this time to go through the overview and kind of the final approach to the facility master plan. You've done a lot of work on this with White and Company, and we have Jason Dwyer from White and Company to present some information tonight. But what I wanted to let you know mainly is that what we're trying to do is to give you kind of the current status, and you should have received a copy of the plan in your email, and I think we had printed copies that were provided as well. This particular plan will go through the standing committee process. So this is not the last time you will see this. Heidi's got some of the packets here too. But what you'll see is it'll show up in the administration committee. I believe we're going to go through admin. Heidi, are we going to go through finance and then executive and then full county board? So that's the approach to getting the plan approved. So you'll have at least 3 more opportunities to provide feedback to White and Company, and you can get that to Heidi or myself as well. But for tonight, we just have Jason Dwyer. He's going to go through what the final draft is, and obviously it won't be final until the county board adopts it. And like I said, we're looking at doing that through the standing committee process, and you would see the final sometime in June is the schedule for that. So is Blair, we need Blair back? Oh, okay.
Scared him away.
Well, we need him to run the slide presentation to get it started, so I'm not sure.
Thing must have happened.
If not, I can get it started.
Oh, Roger, just for clarification, why this will be going through eventually to the full board as mentioned. This is a proposal. This is a proposal to accept the research that has been done by
Yes.
White and Company.
Yeah.
We are not proposing at this point, just for my own clarification, I think for clarification of the board, is any funding mechanism to go with all of this. So this is just a potential land use facility plan for
So-
reference to the future.
Yeah, as we consider capital projects or things are brought to us, this is what we use for guidance to kind of help us direct the activity that would come before the board. So we're focusing on the shorter term, like 0 to 3 years, and then there's 3 to 10 years, and then there's 10+ years. So you'll see that in the planning document, but it kind of gives you the idea of what building management and the administration committee would see as the focus for the next 3 years, the next 10 years, and then beyond that. So
And again, this is like the 2040 plan, this is a
Yes.
reference point for future boards as
Yeah.
well.
it's to guide you through your decisions.
Thank you. Yes, Mr.
Madam
Iqbal.
Chair, Madam Chair, just a point of clarification. Is this the final report now from this architect for the 2040 plan, or would there be some more?
So this is the final, this is Roger again. This is the final, but still in draft. As you go through committee process, if you change it, it would change. And then it would become final, but obviously it would need to be something significant or substantially, like a material defect, something like that. But this is the recommendation. You'll find, I don't want to steal all of Jason's thunder, but there's a technical recommendation. And then there's all of the input from different things from the board and departments and offices. But if we find something that needs to be corrected, we obviously would correct that before the board adopts it.
Or if perhaps if
Okay.
one
Yeah.
building is to be replaced
Yeah.
in urgency with.
There's
another
something that we
building.
find that needs to be updated, but
Okay, are we ready?
I think so. So we have Jason Dwyer from White and Company. Blair, you have his slide. Yep, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good
So
afternoon, Jason.
I'll give you one more bit of background on this. So the county has been working on master plan updates for several years, going back to, I'll say 1989 is the farthest back I recall in terms of planning documents. So the way to think about a master plan like this is sort of a snapshot in time with a projection for addressing what your future facility needs are. Plans will evolve over time. We've been involved in a lot of different master plans with counties over many, many years. And things change. It might be a legislative change that dictates a change in thinking on the plan, an operational change that comes to be, different requirements that come up for county residents that can, make adjustments to the plan. But the idea is to use this as a document to plan for the future with the best information that's available at hand. So the county, as I said, has worked on multiple plans going back to, mid 80s actually was, I think, when the county sought to acquire the property at 38 and Peck Road with an eye toward building a new justice campus, judicial campus there. And at that time, also considering consolidation opportunities. So then a project gets implemented, plans get revisited, retooled, new projections are made based on workload indicators or population factors that drive changes in the plan. So I want you to think about this as a guidance document really for how to move forward with addressing your facilities needs that are tied to the individual department needs in terms of space for staff and other functional operations. So one other piece of work that we did is precursor to the master plan was a space needs assessment. So much of that work was done in 2022. Working with all the different department heads to talk about workload indicators, projections, things that would drive staffing to understand what the projected needs might be out to the year 2050. Also in the context of that, there was evaluation made of existing spaces, the extent and any deficiencies that might be currently in play with your existing facilities to address the operational needs. And then all of that was documented in terms of some longer range projections and used as kind of a basis document for developing the master plan to address the needs. So so that kind of takes us to the state where we started this planning process, which really actually started about a year ago now, with a host of different meetings and workshops with different groups. So I'll give you just a quick summary of that. When we started out the process, we identified 4 key stages. First was working on visioning, developing principles and priorities, understanding what was important to drive future thinking for the needs of the county facilities. Then we worked through a lot of different scenarios to determine strategies on how the needs could be met. We had multiple meetings with steering groups from the judiciary. There were probably 20 people. I think all the individuals who were involved in the different groups are all documented in the final draft report that you have. So we had meetings with judicial groups, government groups, a couple board members were part of that. Regular standing meetings with the administration committee to talk through some of the options and scenarios and provide updates. And then multiple committee of the whole meetings to workshop through some different strategies, get feedback from board members. So we saw through the process to really take in a lot of input from all the key stakeholders, county board members, elected officials, key department heads, to really shape out the plan, because it's not just for us to, kind of come up with a plan and give it to you without input. It's really a collaborative process. And I thought we had some really good workshops along the way. So did a lot of that work through about September, October of last year. And then a little bit of pause. I think at the time you were working to finalize budget and had a lot of other things on your agenda. So we took a little bit of pause from the plan, and now we're back to try to button up the details of this final draft report. So what you're going to see tonight is very much consistent with what was presented at the administration committee. Those that are on the administration committee or might have been present for the meeting or watched it online. A lot of the key recommendations for that in terms of an overall technical recommendation, as well as some short-term strategies, is very consistent. We made a couple adjustments based on some recent discussions you've had on specific facilities. And again, trying to provide a little bit more flexibility in the plan for how to address the needs. So let me start with this. Throughout the whole process, we explored a number of different scenarios, thinking about the long-range vision. And a lot of the discussion came back to centralizing a lot of the facilities in one location to help with operational efficiency, to help from a public standpoint in terms of wayfinding, not having to go to multiple different campuses, and just adding some clarity for where all the services could be met, all the needs could be met. through the county government. So much of the concept planning was to address judicial functions on the south side of 38 at the Judicial Center campus. Also with some of the supportive functions of the multi-use building and some consolidation of CANCOM and other very specialized facilities. Then on the north side of 38, the potential to build a new government center there and potentially consolidation of other health facilities. So this was the technical recommendation for the long range plan. But what came out of a lot of discussions at that point is there's some challenges in the short term that need to be addressed. So rather than just purely focusing on a long range plan, knowing that some of the elements of the plan would not be able to be addressed immediately, we kind of looked at some of the challenges, including how do you fund larger projects, and tried to focus on some scenarios that could come into play to address some of the short-term needs while you continue to strive toward a long-term goal that could be, 15, 20, 30 years out, even potentially, just based on, how everything comes together in the process. In that discussion, there were also a couple higher priority needs that were identified, including some challenges with health department functions, just some significant space challenges at the Judicial Center for State's Attorney and other offices, public defender, court services. That building was built in 1993 and really it had a plan to have expansion before today. And so I think the county has done a really good job of trying to take advantage of every square inch of that property to find spaces for staff that have been hired to run the operations, judges, all that. So, but it's really getting to a critical point where there just is not enough extra space now to provide any more room for the staff that need to operate in that facility. One other thing that came out of some of the more recent discussions is a need to expand some of the court operations at the Juvenile Justice Center. We had a lot of good discussions with the judiciary, and unfortunately, there's been just a more intense caseload in the abuse and neglect side, and the need for additional court space there became a higher priority. So that was part of our overall space needs analysis when we looked at total courtroom count. But right now, there's a real focus on delinquency court and abuse and neglect court at the Juvenile Justice Center, and it makes sense to try to keep those operations consolidated into one location. So we took the overall courtroom count need for the county and organized that a little bit more in a little more finite way by showing that there needed to be some expansion at the Juvenile Justice Center. So, and actually the board has approved some additional thinking on that to try to fine tune some more specifics around that need, but certainly we've identified that that's a higher priority, and there's some other consolidation opportunities there that I'll talk about in a minute. One other thing that I think became clear, certainly in the pandemic and other just kind of increasing needs over the many, many years, is a need for some centralized and consolidated storage. So these are kind of the 4 higher priority items that were addressed as some of the critical short-term needs. Okay, so I'm going to go through each of these individually because
If I may, I think we have a question, Dr. Silva.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the floor. I apologize if I'm interrupting your train of thought, but I think it's so important to look at the needs of the youth who are afflicted with both ends of the judicial system, right? They're being abused and therefore they're committing more crimes. So it's a vicious cycle. And I'd just like to know if we may not even be there yet, but are we thinking in terms of space, what we're going to be able to offer for programs or recreation or fun or things that they'll learn from? Is there the space for those sorts of things, or is the talk not there yet?
Well, we haven't gotten into a deep discussion on extensive new programs, but what I'll say is one of the things that we've gotten from the judicial leaders is a desire to further consolidate all the core elements on the juvenile side. So right now you've got the Children's Advocacy Center, which is a state's attorney component investigating abuse and neglect situations. That's at the property near the 3rd Street Courthouse. The court-appointed special advocate, CASA, is also within the 3rd Street Courthouse. Both have a big role to play in juvenile proceedings. You've got the juvenile court operations, you've got juvenile detention, lockup. Both of those are at the Juvenile Justice Center. One other element that's been talked about and some other counties have enacted with pretty good success is a neutral exchange function. So, there's a number of different ways to handle that. I know DuPage kind of has it connected to their Children's Advocacy Center. And I guess for those that don't know, I mean, in a case where there's a custody, shared custody and challenges between the ex-spouses, there's a safe place to do a drop off or monitored visitation. Again, thinking of the welfare of the children that are part of the system. So what we're looking at is a potential to try to consolidate a lot of those functions together into one space to provide as holistic of a care process as possible for juveniles. I think that there's certainly other opportunities that could come into play that have been discussed, but it's a question of whether operationally it's something that the county wants to get into. Things like juvenile mental health, behavioral health, things that can focus a little bit more on the front end, so that if you've got juveniles that are in distress, that it would kind of try to address some of those challenges before something gets to a situation where they might end up in juvenile delinquency court or, ending up in the juvenile detention facility. So I don't know if that totally answers your question, but we're trying to think about it as holistically as we can based on operations that we've discussed. The idea of expanding other operations, I think, would be more of a policy decision that would have to come up from elected officials and board members.
Oh, no, that's a big, very thorough response to my question. I just like to encourage us all to think about the offering of exposing kids to art, to yoga, to exercise, to other programs. And so we can plan that into our operations and our buildings and those sorts of things. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well said. So just for clarification, what you're going to be showing us, it does not include the programming for the buildings. It is simply to delineate where potential buildings may be placed that are conducive to future programming.
Yeah, and this is really driven out of the analysis we did in the space needs planning. So as we talked to each of the different departments and office holders, understanding kind of what the current staffing was, what some projections for future staffing might be relative to workload, or if they identified that they're expanding a program or that, we would have captured that in the space needs analysis. And then what we're showing here in the master plan is options in terms of addressing those projected long-term needs. So yeah, I think, and that's where I say, when I started with my intro talking about kind of the evolution of planning and master planning, that's why I see counties that are pretty intentional about revisiting master plans on a semi-regular basis. Allows you the opportunity to take into new programs that come up, or a lot of times there's grant opportunities to enact a specific specialized program that might require space. So you might have flex space for some of that kind of stuff. Legislative changes. I mean, we just saw recently some legislative changes in the judicial option, which drives a little bit of staffing needs. So those things happen that are outside of any of our control here. So that's why it's so important to keep on top of that and have a clear plan for the future that provides space to accommodate stuff that comes up and some growth and other opportunities to expand facilities if you decide to enact a special program.
Makes sense to me. Makes sense. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Iqbal, you had a comment.
Yeah, I have one comment on the same page, which is the short-term recommendations, SOA. You have given two options for the SOA criminal division. One is to lease more space, and the second is don't lease any space, but simply renovate the space. So it looks like the space that we have is not being used very efficiently. Is this what you want to say in option two?
No. If you want, why don't I go through each of these? I'll be able to
Yes.
explain that one on the next slide. So on that point in particular, one of the reasons why we're identifying options, because a lot of these scenarios are interconnected. So right now at the branch court, there's a section on the far north side of the building is being used for county clerk storage for voting equipment and other storage there. So If you think about these projects in tandem, let's say the county were to opt to move forward with a new storage facility that could allow you to consolidate all of your storage functions, that would free up space in that building. And what we're saying is that you could either go out and find new space to lease, or another option is if you were to have moved forward with the storage facility, you may have space that could be repurposed for expanded uses. So that's where, I mean, that's why you'll see in here as we enhance the plan to provide scenarios, a lot of them are interconnected. We're trying to give you a number of different options depending on, you know, what the funding realities are, what you can move forward with. You may find that a lease property comes up, it's a perfect opportunity, so that might be the preferred solution, or the option of renovating space that might have been vacated.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah, just kind of going quickly through here, some of the short-term options. I think those that were present at the administration committee in January, we had a lot of discussion about options or a plan for the health department. And I know that thinking has evolved. So what we're showing here is some different scenarios. And I know the board is that's being considered in sort of a separate parallel path. But so we've just identified that there's still need out there. We're trying to identify the overall projected need. And we've noted here some options for short term. I'll come back at the long term end to kind of bookend it a little bit with another scenario. Storage, this one, I think again, there's a couple different scenarios you can do with a storage facility. There's a potential to build your own storage facility. There's depending on how you plan the judicial center campus, I think there's some additional, well, I know there's additional space kind of in the east side, south of 38, that you could accommodate some additional storage. You may also find that just renting storage space, if you can find good warehouse space at a good price, that may be another good solution. One other thing we talked about kind of in a long term is just kind of the overall direction for the Randall Road building, the branch court right now. So again, I'll get to it in a moment, but there's a number of functions in there that ideally would want to be consolidated in the long term into the judicial center with an addition. So there would be additional space available there. So again, that space could be repurposed. That's an asset that the county already owns. So that's where I say when you look at these in terms of scenarios, they're interconnected in many ways. And ultimately, it's kind of figuring out what you can move forward with first out of the short-term priorities, and then that starts to unlock some of the future opportunities. So I talked about the Juvenile Justice Center expansion. I think there's really good merit to consolidating all the juvenile functions there. Right now, they're a little bit separated geographically. So the idea of expanding that, there's a pretty intensive caseload. And from what we've gathered in discussions, the judges that are operating out of that facility are really handling a pretty massive caseload. And it's a challenge. If there's any hiccup in the system, there's really no capacity to take on more. So that's where adding additional courtroom space there and associate staff support space is going to be very important for the really in the short term, because that's a pressing need. State's Attorney Criminal Division, we talked about that a little bit and some of the scenarios there. Anybody that's been over to the Judicial Center and walked through that space can see how tight it is in terms of staff. And I know that there's planning for just growth in the staff based on overall operational needs, and there's really nowhere to put the staff right now. So that's pressing. The other one is at 3rd Street. There's State's Attorney Civil Division, a couple functions there. Reason we're showing some scenarios with that is if you were to move forward with the Juvenile Justice Center expansion and consolidate CASA there, CASA currently resides in the 3rd Street Courthouse, so that would free up some space in the building to accommodate some additional growth for functions that are already in there, including the State's Attorney Civil Division. We did talk to the State's Attorney about a couple different scenarios, but I think there's some real good merit to staying in that building, you know, in terms of proximity to the government center here right now, and just, I think, availability of space. Excuse me. The other piece is government center. And, you know, we did a lot of assessment of this campus here and projections. I know right now some of the setup is not ideal, some space challenges as well. So we're suggesting that, again, on a short-term basis, because, you know, if you're looking at a whole new facility, that's a sizable investment for the county, might not be appropriate or available to happen right now based on funding realities. So there's options to do some leasing space, maybe separate some of the back office functions. So there's a number of functions in county government here that are very direct public facing, supervisor assessments, treasurer, those kind of things that are working with the public on a day-to-day basis, the county clerk. But then there's other ones like maybe the IT department, those that kind of work a little bit more back office to support all the rest of the county government that could potentially be moved to a different location and aren't quite as critical to be consolidated here from a public wayfinding standpoint. Okay, so I'm going to move to midterm options. So I think when we start talking about some of the bigger, more significant projects, a couple of them rise to the top in terms of priority. I mentioned before that there was originally a plan to do expansion at the Judicial Center to provide growth potential there. Was targeted to happen sooner than today. And because it hasn't, you can see that the tightness of the space. So we've identified a long-range solution for Judicial Center expansion to accommodate growth in space. And I would encourage you to always think about that. I know it's hard. These projects are big projects to take down at times, but if you're trying to address, 2, 3, 5 year projected need, by the time you get the building done, it's going to be too small for what you need. So it's hard to accomplish sometimes, but having space that a little bit of excess capacity there is so important when you address things like a legislative change that kind of throws a wrench into the mix here, and then you're forced with having to address something on a more urgent basis. Or back in the early, or I guess probably around 2007 or so, there was a change with additional judges and no space at the county. So we had worked with the county at that time to do a quick assessment of some short-term solutions to address that. Part of that is what led to creating the branch court at Randall Road, because that was the most cost-effective way to do it. It also addressed some other parking challenges at the Judicial Center site at the time. So again, an eye toward looking at what your long-term needs are and trying to, address those as best you can when you implement projects.
Jason, I have a quick
Yeah.
question, if I may. The Judicial Center expansion, that is a very pricey build out. I mean, that's a significant build out, and let's be honest with that. But what is the lifespan of that building? We've seen courthouses, most recently the one in Will County. A 40-year-old building has been knocked down. We see that from time to time throughout Illinois, throughout. Is it a 40-year lifespan? Are we considering spending a fortune on a building that's going to last 50 years, 35 years? What are your thoughts, especially as you're talking about long-term growth?
Sure.
Because the county will continue to expand. The population of the county is destined for expansion.
Sure. I think when you think about a building asset that you're building, you want to be thinking about it as a 50 to 75 year building asset. Because you're making such an investment, you want to make sure that your building asset's going to last you for the long term. What I'll say, so I'll use your situation at the Judicial Center, for example. That building was built, I think, as large as was feasible at the time based on budget and addressing a pretty, decent term need. And it's been 30 years. That building was also designed with a plan for expansion. So I think that's kind of the best way to address it when you develop plans that can address the farthest out projected need that you can with some flexibility. And then knowing that things can change, you need to plan for expansion or an alternative satellite opportunity. So in the case of Will County, because we were involved in that project, the new courthouse, we weren't involved in the old courthouse, but that building is designed with expansion built within the building. But the county, again, because there's always a limitation on funding, that's a difficulty, is it never seems to be quite as much funding as you need to execute everything that you want to do. They have a plan to provide continued expansion for court operations in downtown Joliet and in other locations. So we always want to plan and design buildings to have a long life, because if they're planned and executed properly, you'll be able to continue to use them for many, many years as long as they're maintained well. But the option of having, I call it kind of an outlet valve or a future expansion plan to address increasing needs beyond that.
Well, let's all build it like the original Kane County Courthouse, which is what, 120 years old, I think. Just
Yeah,
saying.
right. I'm going to highlight one thing I just noticed on this slide. So it says midterm 1 to 3 years. This should really be 3 to 10 years, which is correct in your book. I think that was just an oversight when this slide was created. So a couple other things with the Judicial Center expansion. Right now, your circuit court clerk is at the Randall Road Branch Court, which is not the most efficient in terms of transferring files and so forth back and forth between the two buildings. So a lot of the discussion of the steering groups is to consolidate that into a Judicial Center consolidated expansion, diagnostic center, a couple other functions, even bringing the Kane Branch Court back into the building. That does a couple things. You know, from an operational standpoint, the more you can consolidate those functions that require a more intensive security screening process, it just makes more efficient the operational side, staffing side of things too. And just, you know, connectedness between the offices, a little bit easier for public that's, you know, kind of going to court and then needing to maybe pay a fine or something at the circuit clerk. It just makes all that a little bit easier. So we've identified a range between 160 and 200,000 square feet of expansion need for that building to address that consolidation, the projections for the future. Within the plan, there is potential to phase within that. We didn't get into a ton of detail here today. It's in the documentation. A strategy like what I just mentioned at Will County, they built a building that accommodated the overall square footage. They had plans to have 2 of the floors unfinished that could allow for additional court build out to meet needs down the road. They ended up actually having a bonus in their bond sale, kind of complicated, but they opted to go ahead and build them out now just to avoid disruption down the road, but they're not used. They can be used once additional judges are put into place. So that's one of your bigger projects, the Judicial Center expansion and consolidation. Right now, KaneCom OEM is here. Some of the equipment is out at the MUB facility, the multi-use building at the Judicial Center campus. So what we're showing in the plan is to consolidate those functions. That again is, I'll kind of call more of a back office, a private secure operation, not ideal to have it here at this campus in terms of the layout and relationship of the campus. So the opportunity to bring that into an area that's a little bit more secure, a little more connected to some of the judicial functions, sheriff, others that would interact with those groups would be ideal. Then as it relates to health department, we call them hub facilities or satellite facilities. There was a lot of discussion in the planning process that you already have multiple operations in satellite locations. So kind of core footprint here in the Tri-Cities area, but you've got a nice footprint in northern part of the county up toward Elgin, and then south down in Aurora. One of the biggest components there actually is court services, probation department. So much of that, again, is driven by support where their clients are to try to make that operation a little bit more efficient. Health department components in those locations. There's some satellite support functions for county clerk. So what we were suggesting through the process is to find a way to consolidate multiple functions together into one consolidated facility in the north and one in the south, which does a number of things. Provides a little bit of synergy in terms of operations, makes it a little bit easier for the public from a wayfinding standpoint, and just general efficiency. One of the big things we heard through the discussion and with facilities is it's more difficult from a maintenance standpoint to maintain many different individual buildings. It's just, you know, there's economies of scale in terms of how you design the buildings, the equipment, maintaining the equipment, time to get between all the buildings. So there's a lot of operational efficiencies there, a lot of public efficiencies from a wayfinding standpoint. So right now we're identifying the importance of satellite locations, really addressing some current needs, some projected expansion needs. And I think this allows you to address some other desires to bring some of the services closer to where your constituents are, knowing that there's a decent travel time between the far north end and the south end of the county. So, you know, right now we're kind of ranging a little bit the square footage, and a lot of that is dependent upon some final decisions on health department location, quantity, size, and that. But we've given a range of square footage in the documents, just so you have that. And here again, I think in Elgin, you really don't have a property that you own. So I think this would be looking at new property or acquisition of a building that could accommodate a nice consolidation of functions. In Aurora, you own 2 buildings and some modest lease space too, for some individual satellite offices. But I think there's potential for either renovation, redevelopment, repurposing. Maybe you eliminate one building, consolidate a new one. So I think you have a couple different nice scenarios that could be put into play there to address these needs.
Yes, yes, Ms.
Okay,
Bates.
just to clarify things. A hub is a hub and a satellite is a satellite. A hub is what's in the middle and a wheel goes around it. Can we settle on
Sure.
that's not a hub, it's a satellite?
Yeah, I think there was some discussion about terminology that was used and we were trying to cover the bases. But yeah, I think your point's well taken, calling it a satellite. I guess.
Satellite makes sense.
Yeah, where the term hub came in, I think is like a hub in that zone, like its own consolidation because there's multiple functions together. But the point's well taken. And I think if it's more clear, then we could stick with consistency of satellite.
We can
if
get rid
that's
of
still
hub
the
there.
word.
That would,
Sure.
thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bates. Well said.
Okay, so that's kind of the midterm priorities. And then as we look at long-term, this would be kind of your 10+ year scenario. So we've identified the technical recommendation. Still long-term, I think there's very good merit to consolidating functions. But again, it's important to know that you've got different opportunities that could come into play. So through a lot of discussion, a lot of assessment and consideration there, the idea was to consolidate potential new government center on the north side of Route 38 out by the Judicial Center campus to have kind of a consistent, holistic core campus of all judicial and government functions supported by the satellites in the north and the south. But it's good to know. I mean, and we've talked about it many times in committee of the whole meetings, administration committee meetings, that you still have this property here. And, there's nothing that says you can't look at opportunities to modify the campus here. That's definitely an option that's in play. You also have the Fabian Parkway campus, which was the old jail site several years ago, which is to a great degree a pretty clean slate at this point. So you've got some really nice land assets that give you some flexibility. It's just that through all the different discussions and operational efficiencies, we felt that overall consolidation at the 38 and Peck Road location was the most ideal opportunity. So the other piece of it, and again, I think some of this comes down to, how you move forward in the short term to support health department needs. There's a lot of the functions of the health department, which are kind of policy based and providing guidance and liaison support and, inspections and various mandated services that are not as direct client service in the context of, clinical services and that. So there's nice efficiencies to have that connect with other county government functions. So we're still identifying in the technical recommendation, consolidating some core health department functions at one primary location. There's some connections with permitting issuance and that kind of thing too. A lot of different components there. But again, there's still the potential for the satellite locations to provide more direct service. And certainly as you think about down the road, if there's an expansion of direct public service components, or I know there was a lot of discussion about behavioral mental health and potential to expand those operations like some other counties have done. You've got a lot of opportunities there to bring those services to various locations throughout the county and still have sort of a core consolidation of those functions because that there's population kind of, 3 major population centers, Tri-Cities, Aurora, Elgin. So it gives you some good flexibility. And then finally, the Randall Road asset. So I talked before about if you move forward with the expansion in addition to the Judicial Center, it will start to free up some space there, which gives you a couple different scenarios that you could put into play. you know, if you were to lease storage space, for example, for a period of time, and you decided you no longer wanted to lease and you wanted then to repurpose the building, there's potential to repurpose the Randall Road building to become, you know, a storage facility for an asset that you already own. If you happen to find an ideal buyer and that made sense, you could divest of that asset. But again, it just gives you some good flexibility. The other thing I think that's nice is even if you're, you know, implementing some of these other projects, I talk a lot about just having some excess space. It's, you know, it's a nice thing to have a little bit of excess space when something comes up. There's a pandemic and you have to deal with a specialty operation, or who knows what the next curveball that's going to come, you know, come at you. Having some space that you can utilize quickly in an emergency or a legislative change or an operational program that you want to do that you want to enact quickly. You could have an asset here that is available to you to do a number of different uses. It's already being used for storage, judicial operations, and office. So it's got a pretty good amount of flexibility to it. You could expand your conferencing operations there. You could repurpose the current courtroom that's in there into a nice training center. It actually has some of that built in as part of the original plan. So, like I say, we tried to develop a comprehensive plan that looked at your long-term projected needs from the space needs analysis, but gave you some scenarios and options to implement things as funding is available and as you know, priorities are nailed down. So I think I talked through this a lot. We kind of just sort of highlighted where these sit in the short, mid, long term. So item 1 is in the kind of right in the center of the screen there to the right is the Juvenile Justice Center is kind of a shorter term priority need. The lower right is the CaneCom OEM new facility there next to the multi-use building. There's also, that's option 2, that's in the midterm. And then the expansion of the judicial center is also in the midterm. And then on the north side would be option 3, kind of your long range plans. If you proceed to move the government center there and a potential consolidated health department or expanded functions there. There's a couple smaller components that are addressed here too, relative to some really short-term, small-scale things like parking demands, some components to support some of the sheriff's operation from a loading standpoint. So, but I really wanted to today focus on kind of your more significant components of the overall plan. So with that, I will be happy to answer any questions that you have.
And questions, you said, are there going to be any questions? Yes. Are there any questions? Yes, Ms. Gomes.
I have a couple off the top, but you identifying the storage needs. We've had many conversations over the last couple of months about that. And having this discussion is essential, and also the kind of direction change. So I appreciate that. I did have a question. In your analysis, when we're looking at our assets, right? We have Fabian, and we have some other properties that we're calling assets. Are they really an asset if we're not going to do anything with them for 50 years?
Well, I would still call it an asset. I mean, when you own a piece of property, you know, I think, you know, it's nice to have that to deal with opportunities that, you know, or challenges that you have. Even if it's simply to, you know, some other entity comes along and says, hey, we're looking for space in this region. Maybe it's something that you want to sell that asset, but I still would consider it an asset. You know, I find oftentimes that other counties they have struggles with not having any property. So one of the challenges they have is not only are they trying to find space in a building, but they don't even have a location to do it or a property. So you're out looking for a property and then trying to implement a project. One of the things that's a benefit here in Kane County is that you have a couple nice properties that give you a little bit of flexibility.
Okay, I appreciate that. It's going through my brain, I think, while I'm sitting here. So, you know, you have some assets, and I agree they are assets, but I mean, if we're not utilizing them, you know, in our plan that we're looking forward on, what should we be doing with those unused properties. Now, the storage issue is huge and the consolidation is huge, and hopefully we've identified that there's going to be a solution to that at some point. You also identified that some of the recommendations were bringing, I'm not going to go back to my paper here, but bringing our services to where our constituents are. And I really respect that and I appreciate that, because that's a conversation that we've had back and forth. So I like that. And I think we have to have further conversations about that. My long-term vision doesn't go so far as the 50 years. So I'm trying to get through today.
Yeah. Understood.
That's all I got.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Yes, Mr. Iqbal?
Madam Chair, I have a question on page 8. That shows,
But the pages are not numbered.
shows the properties across the county. And I don't see clerk's name. It looks like this.
In the bound.
Bound book. I got it. I got it. In the PowerPoint.
It does not talk about the county clerk.
Yeah, it's under the government center. It's the first item.
Okay, but in Aurora, they have some facility.
Yeah. I think that's it's if I recall, downtown Aurora, there's a very small satellite office. So I mean, I guess.
That's
Yeah.
a rental.
Yeah, right.
It's a space that's given to,
So,
my
yeah, I think
understanding, to the clerk, being donated.
And it is very, Madam Chair, if I may. Yeah, Mr. Iqbal, it is extremely tiny location, but it is utilized
By the clerk.
by the clerk extensively.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you. The same way, I think if you look at the Elgin satellite for state attorney's office, it's a city council room and they get it for 2-3 hours, but it is listed. But on the other hand, clerk and Aurora that occupies that little space for 24 hours is not listed. So that's what I'm looking at. Where do you draw the line?
Well,
Yeah, we'd be happy to add it. I mean, I certainly in terms of the planning and consolidation of the satellite, that's absolutely one of the functions we've talked a lot about. When we did the government steering groups, we talked about those public facing entities, trying to consolidate those all into a combined space. But yeah, we'd be happy to add a notation to that effect that they have a small office in Aurora. No problem.
Yeah, it's not important to revise it, just
a note.
we should know. Then on page, I believe 26.
Which page?
26. You have mentioned that the space demand for at least 3 units will decrease. The second line is the circuit court jury commission. You mentioned that it will go down by 2050, it will go down 20%. The same way you said about circuit clerk, that it will go down 41%. And then you say the probation, Elgin probation police department, I would say, court services will go down 15%. Is this because they see the department shrinking, or is the building they are in is too big for them right now?
Yeah, so this comes down a lot to kind of purpose-built, purpose-planned space. So the methodology we use in terms of looking at space needs projections is we look at standardized square footage per person based on office type, which is a pretty consistent process for doing bulk projections. So we've developed a model for departmental gross square footage. I think what we found is that there's certain situations where space was not purpose-built. So I'll use this circuit clerk as an example. So that space is built with very generous workstations and spaces between workstations. Also, at the time, there was a pretty substantial need for paper filing storage, which, more and more of it's become digital. So when you look at the long term, you can have an increase in staff, but still have a decrease in overall space needs. So that's kind of what's coming into play there. Thinking about trying to develop space that's properly planned and right-sized using kind of consistent metrics for, modern space layout. And a lot of that, frankly, is a reflection of, a lot of these spaces are expensive to build, especially when you're talking about judicial spaces. It's difficult to provide overly generous space. So I think it's important to, be fiscally responsible to look at spaces that are appropriately sized for the functions that are being done there. And so that's an example of a couple of those cases where right sizing it and properly planning can allow you to do it in smaller square footage, even with more people.
And the
Good.
circuit clerk, from my understanding, is fully digital now. They have scanned everything in, so they're a fully digital operation.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, yes, Ms. Bates.
Thank you. On page 10, first of all, I really appreciate the way you've divided this into, like first 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, so that we have I think that was reflecting our wishes and succinctly putting the horse before the cart, as opposed to the cart before the horse. So I appreciate that. Looking at like under number 01, are these supposed to be in order, or are these just a bunch? Because I'm not sure we've ordered these in.
No, I think we're not prioritizing within the zones at this point. I
Okay.
mean, and I think part of the reason all of those fit in the short-term category from our perspective and the
Mhm.
discussions we had with all the key stakeholders. It's a challenge to say that this absolutely is to happen before that. Like I said, some of them are interconnected, or one being completed maybe frees up an option for another. So if you move forward with Juvenile Justice Center expansion, it might free up some space in the 3rd Street Courthouse. So, and ultimately, I think within that category, sometimes it's about opportunity. You might find that you've got a really great opportunity to lease a little bit of space to provide an outlet for the state's attorney, for example. And that opportunity just presents itself, and you could take action quickly on it. So it's not really intended to be rank ordering.
So we still have that work to do, but
Yeah.
we've made a lot of progress. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Are there any online? All right. Well, this is quite a thorough report, and you've given us, even though many of us are quiet right now, I'm sure it'll become much more lively conversation as we move forward with what our next steps are going to be. So can you review for us one more time what are our next steps, so we can just hear it again? Roger, I think you had that. What are charges to get this thing approved?
So the next opportunity for this will be the administration committee meeting. We will be doing another presentation, a little bit more information, but probably taking into consideration some of the comments today. And that is going to be on May 15th at 10:30 a.m. at administration committee. So if you want to join us for that, you're welcome to join us. We'll be discussing it on the agenda. And then the follow-up to that would be to go to finance for their review of it, which would be trying to find the date for that. I believe it's like 2 weeks after that, so I don't have the exact date, but
Before
finance would
Memorial
be,
Day.
yeah,
Before
finance would be the second meeting, but the next scheduled meeting would be May 15th, administration at 10:30.
And then
that'll
on
be-
to exec. And
That'll
then-
be the standing committee.
Very good. Now finance, because we started this meeting saying that this is a conceptual proposal with no money attached to it.
Yes.
Are you suggesting that we put together just some proposed numbers for short-term needs? Because I don't think that this board, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't feel that this board is ready to talk about long-term financing quite yet, but certainly addressing perhaps short-term considerations.
I think our interest would be in them, having an understanding of the 1 to 3, the 3 to 10, and 10 plus, just for their input about the program or the planning, so that they're aware of, what they think financially is responsible. But there's no direction to finance any of these particular items. Those will be handled separately.
Okay, very good. So this is, again, just a
Just their-
conceptual knowledge of where we need to go if any of these proposals come
Well,
through for budgeting.
And I would encourage you, if you have input, if you wanted to email me, myself, Roger Fonstock, or Heidi Files, you could email us comments or questions. We could try to get those incorporated into the admin meeting in advance of the meeting, so that we're a little better organized. But if you bring your ideas that day, you're welcome to do that as well. But don't hesitate to send something if you think that we should be aware of it and be thinking about it, because as it goes through the standing committee process, you're going to have a resolution that is saying that the county board adopts the facility master plan. So as it gets amended, if there's things that change, by the time we get to full county board, we want the final plan approved.
I think that the other thing that we have to discuss is that if we want to acquire and have use for the government use on 38, we're going to have to discuss how we can change that so we can appropriately use that property for government use rather than judicial. And that's part of I think, to get that going, we can't even talk about use of that property except now for farming, for any other use, or build another court on it. So that would be something we can talk about for the next
Sure.
legislative cycle.
Yeah, so Madam Chair, if I may,
This comes.
we have talked about the restrictions on that property, so that would be a legislative issue.
Correct.
Knowing that, I shouldn't say knowing, assuming that we'll likely not develop the government center major project for a while. It's not a non-fire issue.
Oh, absolutely not.
So not that it can't be done, but collaboratively, we should figure out how to do that, but know that it's not an on-fire situation.
I
So
think perhaps after the elections and the following year, when the new legislature takes their seat, we can start gently moving that forward.
excellent.
So we got a year.
Or maybe 10,
In other words,
Thank
it's
you.
not happening this session.
maybe 10 years.
But if I can continue, Roger's been very helpful with legislative matters, so, and he's familiar with that as well. I mean, as you know, we've talked about it, so.
So that could be something that we know we have to act upon, just to have it ready for our use if we so choose.
We've been in contact with both St. Charles and Geneva too about the boundary agreement and other things related to the property. Those are some things we'll have to work through over time too.
And that's at no cost to the county.
Yeah, we're in it. The property that you're looking at, it's in unincorporated St. Charles. So
And there is no need for any other land acquisition because we have enough to be able to build whatever we desire within the constraints of our own
Yep.
property. Our assets, correct assets. Yes, ma'am.
I do have a couple more questions because we're, strategizing for forever here. So, when we're talking about, the assets that we have, when we identified that probation's going to need some different spacing. So this is what we're here for, is just to have conversations. So in my brain, I see, our solution, whatever that might be with the health department, whatever we end up deciding there. But probation being on Highland and Sullivan there, we own 3 properties on Highland, 1 vacant, and then the health department and the probation. Is that, or am I missing one?
there's two main locations. There's 1240 and 1330 Highland, and the one has a side lot that's used for a community garden.
Okay, so in my brain, I see, the probation office and the space needs assessment, maybe repurposing them into one of those properties and selling the other. If we're not utilizing the land, and I know it's an asset, but I'm just here to have a conversation about that. And I think, that would be a good option. So
It's something we certainly can consider.
Yeah, actually, this is Jason Dwyer. Actually, on page 73, we showed just kind of a diagrammatic concept for that. So I think that there are opportunities. The fact that you own the two different parcels, some of that was a thought toward timing and phasing too. So yeah, I think there's a potential maybe to build on the garden plot site, maybe flip the building so you can get one thing built before you take another one offline. So, but again, that's the beauty of having a couple different property assets. It gives you some flexibility.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, yes, Ms. Bates?
Just a comment about the community gardens, which have a lot to do with health. Keeping those community gardens for the health department, so let's not follow them yet. No,
There's no
both.
immediate plans to make any changes to that. The only issue is we need to make sure we mow it or else the city will come and cite you. We found that out.
All right, anybody else? Okay, very good. Thank you so much. This has been well said. We still do not, yes, one more.
I'm so sorry. I would just like to bring attention to the fact that the circuit clerk still has to use paper for some things that can't be, that will forever have to be paper. So we will need space for that.
Right. Just need paper,
Circuit clerk's office.
at least for the near future,
Yes, some things can't go digital.
for the very near future, but thank you for that.
Madam Chair, just to that point, I took the old space needs and I kind of have them both here. So the circuit clerk did identify that they're actually going to need more space. So I don't know where that sits, but
One of the things that you can't digitize is some of the information or artifacts, items from the court cases have to be kept. So they're not necessarily like a court record as much as they're evidence or there's things related to the case that need to be maintained. And that for certain cases that are maintained forever, the content or the things they're storing never go away. So they only compound and get larger. So that is a concern as you think about it in the future. So when you look at either a new facility or storage facilities getting attached storage, secure storage, private storage that you can kind of compartmentalize is really important. And that's something that we'll have to be considering as we go through this. But I think the circuit clerk and from the previous plan, you know, going back to, I think 2015, 2014 was always looking at how do they move the circuit clerk's office to the court complex. And I think that's still something that the court also went through a master planning process. And that was one of the things that they identified was having all the court functions at the Judicial Center campus for the continuity of the offices and what they do. So it wasn't something that maybe was something buildings or White and Company. It came out of their master plan.
Correct. And I think we've all heard about that for some time. Yes. Yes, yes.
Shep Rose,
Yes.
State's
Mr.
Attorney.
Shepro.
I believe for many years, Cook County Circuit Clerk has had old files at a remote location. They're not at the principal office. And if you need a file from 1962, they might take a couple of days.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's actually a great point. I'd highlight that. I think a lot of counties have been very successful, and you know, some of the stuff is archived things you have to save forever, but you're not accessing on a regular basis. So if you think about you know, fiscal responsibility relative to building construction, storage building is a lot less expensive than a courthouse or a secured court facility. So any space that that doesn't need to be directly, you know, accessed on a regular basis, if you can put it into a secured storage facility for significantly less dollars than in kind of a core court facility. Will County's plan was implemented that way. They actually have a transitional plan to take active storage and convert that into offices as they continue to diminish their active records as they go more and more digital. But they have a remote storage facility. I think DuPage has a little bit more luxury of space in the basement of one of their buildings, but it's a great way to do it to save dollars on building. So, and that's something I would say should be considered in the planning.
It's
part of
the
the
same model that many museums and libraries have. If you need something from a certain period of time, they'll get it to you, but it'll take a little bit of time.
Right.
Horseback, horseback.
Nevada.
Yes.
So is there a statute of limitations on how long we have to keep this evidence?
And yeah, I think
Is
that,
that-
I think
Is that right?
that goes, that's a good question, but go beyond the purview.
Yeah, that's a correct, but there's different requirements. So yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Just one more comment. I think it is critical and a good idea for us to preserve these assets and to keep our options open for example, the Fabian land or two places on Highland. They're not making more land. So I think it's important for us to hold on to what we have.
And,
So.
yes.
Dutch.
All right, that's it.
Dutch.
So with nothing else, may I have a motion? Since we still don't have a quorum,
Don't need a motion.
We need a motion.
We don't have a
That-
quorum.
we don't have a quorum, so everybody have a lovely day.
Should note for the record that the non-meeting meeting is adjourning